Hey everybody, how are you? So this is going to be another one of those videos where it's not going to be very heavy on the research, but more me just sharing my thoughts with you on a topic that I think is not only of particular importance, but of critical importance in our current political environment. So I've been making these videos for, a couple of weeks now. And it was mentioned to me by someone who was giving me constructive feedback that I was a little bit angry in some of the topics that I was talking about. Now, that's true. I feel very passionately about some of the things that I discuss. But it's got me thinking. And it's something that I was thinking about actually for a while in regards to what's been going on in our politics, but in particular, my thinking had kind of been jogged by a podcast that I watched a little while ago, a couple days, couple weeks. I'll attach the link here. And it was a podcast from a guy called Matt Lewis, and he was interviewing the authors of a particular book called White Rural Rage. And they were talking about the anger that, white, rural, specifically usually evangelical Christians were feeling towards all sorts of different groups of people. What they were talking about, it's not just rage, it's contempt. That's the word that I think is key here. And contempt is something that's been really sinking deep into our politics of late. And to be honest, when I started my political work, my political project, I was just trying to figure out what had happened to people to cause them to change in such a dramatic way, and change in regards to a couple of things. It originally started out with just, not believing certain facts, right, about COVID or about who won the 2020 election, these kind of just factual differences, right? But there's more than that. We all hear about our culture war that's going on all the time. And I, for example, have had not many, but a handful of dear friends who are trans people, right? And I've been hearing the stories that these trans people told me about, the things that had been done to them, at them, their entire lives. The level of just raw torture that they had been put through for nothing by people who didn't know them, who they had not wronged in any way, right? And on the other hand, I see these people, right, and I really feel for them, because why would someone do that to you? To treat you like you're not even a human being, like some monstrous freak for your whole life for no reason. And then, because I spend a lot of time watching, not even watching, more like observing right-wing media, far-right media, I see guys come up like Charlie Kirk. He's the guy that runs Turning Point USA, which is a very famous kind of like far right-wing social media messaging thing. I guarantee you will have seen their commercials on YouTube. It's always something like, oh, Charlie Kirk owns libtard, whatever, where he's just like arguing with a 16-year-old who doesn't really know what they're talking about, and he has such pride in being able to out-argue a teenager. But that's him on these little commercials. He also has a podcast. And in one of these podcasts, he was talking with two other of these far-right nut jobs. And because part of the aspect of their culture war is that they have to insert it into literally everything, what was going on that particular podcast is that there had been another one of these horrifying school shootings, right? And this Charlie Kirk and his people, they were pushing some nonsense about it being a trans shooter, because they always try to link these things together. Whenever there's a mass shooting, they're always going to try to blame it on a trans person or a Mexican or something like this, despite the fact that if you look at the actual statistic, trans people are far less likely to engage in these kind of behaviors, and the people who are most likely to become a mass shooter are disturbed young white men. But that's beside the point. The thing that was so disturbing was what Kirk and his other two guys, I don't know their names, were saying, but how they said, with one of these, trans mass murderers, again, making it up because there was no trans mass shooter. They were saying, like, oh, I'd love it to just see them on the execution table. I'd like to pull the switch. I'd like to watch them fry. And I'm looking in this person's face, and I can see just the raw bloodlust. How badly they want to kill these, people who they would say in their minds are like faggots or queers or whatever it is. And the people that they're talking about are people who are like my friends, people like the people that I had known. And it's sickening. And the same thing is reflected in, CPAC, Conservative Political Action Conference, where they're talking about eliminating transgenderism. What I hear is they want to eliminate my friends, because transgenderism is not a thing, all right? There are transgender people. You cannot separate them out from this, and that the only way to eliminate transgenderism is to eliminate these people, like just as the only way to eliminate Jewishness is by eliminating all Jewish people. And that's not, again, I don't mean this particular video to be an expose on the trans issue. I mean it to talk about the kind of hatred that I see pouring from people on the far right, and how it is so closely impacting people that I care about, on the one hand. But it's also affecting people in other ways, because I have people that I care about in my family who watch Fox News, who listen to people, maybe not Charlie Kirk particularly, but people like Charlie Kirk. And I see people that I care about unknowingly and unwittingly, that's what's important, repeating pieces of propaganda from these people. And the things that my relatives are saying are not very different from things that tens of millions even of other Americans are saying. Things that are often being said by these rural white Americans. Their ideas about trans people, their ideas about minorities, their ideas about, non-Christians or climate change or what have you. A lot of these ideas and the things that they say are deeply hateful and cause a lot of pain to a lot of people. However, I have been studying for the last couple of years how this comes about, how these people have been lied to, people like my family, people like those rural white Americans, how they have been lied to, how they have been cynically manipulated and really abused by people like Charlie Kirk, by people like Donald Trump, who are the real evil and who know what they're doing, and for whom I have absolutely no tolerance. But for everyone else, these people can be saved, And a lot of us say, I've had conversations with a lot of people, and something I hear from people who tend to be more on what I guess you would call the far left, is that, oh, they did it to themselves. Because the fact of the matter is that a lot of these rural white people living in these places and who share the ideas that maybe many of my relatives share, they have been electing to power people who have defunded their schools and defunded the infrastructure and cut off the social programs in the places where they live, which is why the suicide rate in red rural America is so high, why the rate of poverty there is so high, why the rate of education is so low and teenage pregnancy is so high. Like, people in red states are really, really suffering from this. The statistics, it's amazing. There are places where it's like really a third world country, where they have no access to medical care or services, like 150 miles with no OBGYN or things like that. And there's a lot of people who want to get angry and they say, oh, they did it to themselves. They voted these assholes into power. And that is technically true. They did vote these people into power. But when you spent at least as much time as I have studying and looking into these people and seeing why, a lot of the type of analysis that we use to understand why a lot of crappy things happen in poor communities of people of color and whatnot, you can apply that same kind of logic and thinking to poor rural white communities. And when you also look at the social dynamics of those communities, how these people have been manipulated through their churches, for example. That's a really big phenomenon that we've got going on, of how the right wing has so closely integrated itself with the idea of Christianity in the United States, and how they have told these and manipulated these people for such a long time that if you want to be a real American, if you want to be a real Christian, you have to hate so and so and so and so. And even, all of the other people, the people who maybe don't live in those communities, but who do listen to Fox News, for example, and maybe I can tell you some more upper middle class suburban people who watch Fox News and are being told things about people who live in cities, or being told things about people who live in the ghetto, about communities that they don't understand. And they are being lied to and they're being manipulated. And I hear people tell me, oh, that all of these people, yeah, they're being lied to, but it's not like someone's holding a gun to their head. They could go on the internet, they could look it up, they could actually find out the truth for themselves. Yes, that is true. I understand that. But there's a choice that I try to make, and I think is really, really important to make. And, the way that I want to describe this, there was a story I heard long time ago, actually. I first probably heard this story reading it in a Dresden Files book, which is a book series I love to read. And it's supposedly an old Native American myth that in each person you have two wolves, the white wolf and the dark wolf. And the white wolf is good and nice and, protects the community and all of your good impulses. And the dark wolf is about anger and greed and violence and all this kind of thing. And the question is, which one wins? It's the one you feed, right? It's the one you reinforce. It's the one you make stronger through your individual choices throughout your life and through the things that you are exposed to. And what's happening in our country is that there are a lot of people out there, people who know better, the people who have power, who really deserve our anger, And they are feeding the dark wolves of this country for all sorts of different people. They are not just giving people permission to be their worst selves, but arguably telling them that they should. You know, what Donald Trump does, he comes in and tells people is that not only is your racism okay, it's good. You should be feeling that. And you shouldn't feel any guilt for it because everyone else is the same. And your greed or selfishness or paranoia, all of these kind of things are good things. That's what Trump and his people say. That you shouldn't feel bad about them, that you should lean in because everyone else is just like that. But that doesn't have to be the case. We can make a choice to be different. And I'm trying on a daily basis to make a choice. To make a choice to feed the good wolf. At least in my case, and for the people around me. That I am going to try to reach out to these people who have been cynically manipulated because they can be saved. You know, just as they have been cynically corrupted, they can be hopefully cleansed of this corruption. And that's something that I'm going to try to do. And it just makes me feel better as a person, you know, to not hold anger at these people. And I know that there's a lot of you who have an instinct like me when you hear people saying certain things, you know, whether it be about gay or trans people or whomever else, when they say things that are painful and harmful to people that you know and care about, remember that they might be saying that from a place of fear. They might be saying that from a place of ignorance. We really, you know, our mental environments, our thinking of the world, our understanding of basic facts is so different depending on what side of the political spectrum you fall on, that they genuinely might not understand the harm that they are causing. Now, there are people who do. Sean Hannity knows what he's doing. Tucker Carlson knows what he is doing. Donald Trump knows what he is doing. They are lying about people, and they are destroying their lives with an absolute focus and a goal to cause pain, to cause suffering, and to cause division. But again, we cannot label all of their, you know, I'm tempted to switch between, like, do I call them supporters or do I call them victims? Because in a certain way, they are also victims of this mental crime that has been perpetrated upon them by the far right. So, what I'm going to try to do in an upcoming series of videos is, just on a relatively basic level, I'm going to look at certain narratives. Because narrative, what is that? It's telling a story, right? And our species name is Homo sapiens, right? The wise man. And if I'm not mistaken, one of my favorite authors, Neil Gaiman, he said we should be called Homo narrativus, which would be the storytelling man. And that's a good point, because we think we are rational creatures, right? And we can be, but that's not the core of our nature, right? That's not what we instinctively are. We are storytelling creatures. And we think about the world in stories that kind of more or less supposed to make sense and flow in a certain way. Whereas in reality, maybe the world doesn't match up with those stories. In fact, it rarely does. And it's usually more complicated and a lot more messy than that. You know, to show you how powerful this is, let me give you a simple example. And this is something that I've used to really flip people's thinking on a dime on particular issues. Very often when it's talking about some form of government support or social welfare programs or things like this, government regulation in the economy. You know, always somebody's gonna say, well, you know, if you give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, but if you teach a man a fish, you feed him for a lifetime. I was like, okay, we all get it. And, you know, the moral of that story is that people have to be self-sufficient, right? So I grab that story and I say, okay, you got your man, he's fishing, he's doing his thing. Now, let's say that some giant corporate asshole opens up a factory a couple 100 yards upriver, and they start pouring all of their dreck, their garbage, their runoff into the river, and they kill off all the fish, and now the guy's got nothing to eat. Now what? And you see, we have the same basic story. You modified it in a little way to show something that could really happen, and you get to a different result. That, you know, there are times when government really does have to come in and protect the little guy. Likewise, I'm going to try to explore certain narratives that the right wing has gotten into people's heads so deeply that it's treated like you know, like gravity. It's just a fact of nature or something like that. You know, the idea that Republicans are for law and order, the idea that they're patriotic, the idea that they're pro-America or pro-Christian, or that they're better for the economy, or any of this. These are stories that have a really deep underlying assumption in our politics, that when I find myself talking with people on the right, it's like, how could you believe anything else? You know, it's sky is blue, sun rises in the east, that kind of thing. But when you actually look at the facts, when you actually look at what's really going on, it's not the case. So I hope to be able to provide, you know, some useful information to help people learn a little bit about what's going on. But most of all, I want to focus back in on what I was saying before, that I, at least, I'm not going to say anything for anyone else, but this is a conscious choice that I am making, that I am going to treat people with mercy rather than rage, that I'm going to go up to them with kindness facing forward, and that I'm going to try to really look at the person that I'm talking to and not immediately judge them based on some of the things they say, even if those things sound ignorant and hurtful, without at least making an effort to understand where this person is coming from and see if they can be changed. See if they can be shown perhaps the perspective of people who are a little bit different than them. And that's something I'm going to be trying, not just for them, but also for my own sake, so that I am not full of anger. Because anger, it is a poison. It is an internal poison that eats one alive. And I know that from my own personal experience. So, you know, mercy first. Kindness first. Empathy first. And I'll leave you all with that. Thanks for watching that, guys. I really appreciate it. If you liked that video, then please like the video. And also subscribe. That would be really, really helpful. And most of all, please leave a comment if you can. Because firstly, it really helps algorithmically. And also, I'm pretty new at this, and I could use the feedback. So if you could do that and also share these videos with your relatives and friends, that would be really nice. Till next time, guys. Bye-bye.